Just to let everybody know, the meeting will be recorded and available. I'll put it up on my blog, which the address is going to be at the end of the live meeting, so you can actually go over it again if you wish to. Okay, so we'll make a start. So this live meeting is about cost cutting using SharePoint 2010. It's quite a bit of a passion of mine at the school that I work at. In our school we're calling it the Paperless School Project, which is basically to try and remove paper from everything we do within school. Firstly, let me tell you a bit about myself. I'm the Information Systems Manager at West Hatch High School in the UK. I've worked in education for over 17 years in IT, led teams in the early adoption of most Microsoft systems. So we are the first school in Europe to deploy Windows 7. We first school in the UK to have a SharePoint 2010 based website. Numerous case studies on a Microsoft site if you search for West Hatch. Before that, I had case studies done at my old school as well, so I do have some experience of putting these systems into place. Also a regular presenter at events, so the SharePoint Best Practice Conference in the UK. For anybody that's in the UK, the BET Show, which is a big educational show that runs in the UK, gets sort of 26,000 visitors across 3 days. And recently, this July, was awarded the SharePoint MVP for everything that I've done over the last year. So these are the topics I'm going to go over. So I'm going to give you some background as to what we're actually doing at West Hatch, how we're using SharePoint to reduce costs. I'm going to give you a quick demo after we've prayed to the demo gods of an actual product that we use within SharePoint within the school. And then I'm going to show you some InfoPath 2010 and SharePoint Designer 2010 of how you can create your forms and your workflows to actually produce what you want and what fits into your actual business needs. So to give you some background, as a school and as most businesses, we've got high levels of investment in IT and we need a return on investment. As my governors say to me, over the last 3.5 years we've spent nigh on £1.5 million in ICT infrastructure and licensing, etc., etc. They now need to see that working for the school. Especially given the current economic situation across the world, we cannot be spending money anymore on IT, no more big capital projects. So we've got to start seeing what we've got, what we've already spent actually working for us. Now, in school, we use approximately, last year we did a quick count, 1.5 million sheets of paper a year. Now, to give you an idea, the image on the right-hand side basically shows you that is 3 times the height of the Statue of Liberty. So, stacked up, that's quite a lot of paper. That's across all sort of 3 ways that it's been used. So, printing, copying, letters that go home to parents, reports that go home to parents about their students. And in particular, when we decided we were going to start this paperless project, we looked at one particular thing that happens in a secondary school, and that's an academic review day. Now what that is basically all the students have a day off, except they have to come in for an interview with the teacher along with their parents. They have to set targets for the coming year and they're reviewed after halfway through the year. And what we found was, because of all the paper that's involved in that, so paper that goes home, paper that used to in our cases, it used to be write out the targets. We were spending £8,000 a year just on those 2 days in paper and printing and postage and time for the office. So if you imagine all these letters that are going out, little old lady sitting in the corner of the office franking 1,300 envelopes that have got letters in to go home to students just for those academic review days. So we decided that we were going to use that as our first project to get rid of paper, and that was a great success. And then we've gone on to actually remove even more paper forms from within the school. So what I'm going to do now is basically give you a quick demo, hopefully, of how one of the paper type forms that we used to have in schools is basically now all done using SharePoint. So hopefully you've now got a view of my desktop, and I'm logged in currently to our school learning gateway and the staff side. And over here we've basically got absence requests. So I'm going to click on that and log in, and hopefully not put my password where everybody can actually see it. And while that loads up, I'll tell you what this is. It's basically in schools, if you want to have an absence, i.e. go for a dentist appointment or doctors, or if you even want to go on a course, anything like that, you have to put an absence request in. That's the same across any business, not just schools. In schools, it's probably a slightly more complex procedure in that we have to, for teachers especially, it has to go through what's called a cover manager, which then looks at the timetable and says, well, can we afford for that teacher to be out of school? If they say yes, then it goes to the teacher's line manager, and that has to be approved. Now, that used to be just by paper. So the piece of paper will be filled in, go to the cover manager, they would tick it yes or no. That paper would then go to the line manager, say yes or no, and then back to the actual teacher. Now, there's two things to that. That's also a long process, but it's also an opportunity to lose the piece of paper. So we've taken that paper and literally turned it into a form on SharePoint. As you can see, it's picked up my login name automatically, and it's picked up what department I'm in. We basically do that using InfoPath. We say pick out the username, and then if this is a list within SharePoint, which then has a list of all our staff members in and the departments they're in, so it fills in those boxes automatically. It also fills in the line manager automatically as well, and then also from that list gets their email addresses. Then basically the user goes along, fills in the form, start date, end date, number of days absence that they're going to want to have, and the date and the reasons for the absence. And the absence status is basically if they want to go back in at any point, they can actually cancel it or amend it, and that kicks in a different workflow from just an active absence status. And then basically periods off, timetable, and the cover required. I'm not actually going to fill it in because I don't have any absences to put in yet, and it will slightly confuse the cover manager if I put one in now. But once they've filled it all in, click save, then basically saves the form into a standard SharePoint list, and then workflows kick in, which basically take that form, email the cover manager with all the details, she goes into it, and then what you cannot see, or as a person filling it in, is the second section which appears under here, is that the cover manager and the line managers can see is the approval process, which then they go in, select from a drop-down box, approved, and then that kicks in another workflow which sends it to the line manager, and the line manager, if they approve it in the same way, that kicks off another workflow which then sends an email to the actual person who initiated the form to say you can actually go on this course or this medical report or anything like that. So it's quite simple, it's quite straightforward, it's all done by email, so therefore it's quite quick as well. So you can probably get these absence request forms done within a day or two quite easily. That's a very simple one. I can't show you the academic review day one because obviously that's got confidential data on it about students. But as this one hasn't, this is just an example of a very easy form that you can do using InfoPath. Okay, so if we go back to the actual presentation. Okay, so let's move on to InfoPath 2010. Just a word, I will only be talking about 2010. I've vague recollections of using 2007, but everything we've done so far is on 2010. So it's extremely simple to use. If you've used any of the actual Office products, you'll be quite familiar with InfoPath 2010. There are actually two parts to InfoPath. There's actually InfoPath Designer 2010 and then InfoPath Filler 2010. InfoPath Filler 2010 is basically the application you can use if you don't want to use web browser based forms. So they can fill those forms in using InfoPath Filler. It's very easy to connect to SharePoint. You can probably just see on this image here that basically here you've got two ways of connecting to SharePoint, a SharePoint list and a SharePoint form library. And as it says there, browser-based forms, as you've seen, everything can be run within SharePoint itself, which makes life a lot easier, and it's also something that everybody's familiar with. So I did consider doing a demo of InfoPath to actually create a form, but I didn't want to trust the demo gods too much on one live meeting, so I've taken some quick screen grabs of InfoPath 2010, which you can see on the screen. You basically, sort of best practices that we've done in the past is, if you're using InfoPath, then you go into InfoPath, choose the SharePoint list that you want to create, and you create the list using InfoPath. There's no need to create the list in advance. So basically, you go in, connect to the actual server, tell it what server and site collection you want to use, create the new list, give the list a new name, and what it will do is, as you can see in this one here, is it basically creates a simple form, and it puts in there two fields, literally the title field and an attachments field, as well as modified by and created by. So it's really, really basic and really, really simple. You can take the fields out that you don't want, and so you can get rid of the attachment if there's like the absence request, you don't want them to attach anything, so you can take that out, and then you can add fields in as and when you like. So the basics of the actual form is a table. You can go into that table, add cells, and then start to drag in controls. So as you can see from here, from this bottom section here, you've basically got controls there that you can then add into the cells of that table. So you've got text boxes, combo boxes, date pickers, which you can actually have so it picks just the date or the date and time, buttons, picture buttons, calculated fields, and all sorts. Ones we've made a great deal of in our academic review day form is the person picker control, which allows you to put part of a user's name in the Active Directory, and it will then pull that person through to the form, and then you can use that, as we've done in academic review, to then do subsequent forms and actually pull data out of different locations into that form. It saves the teacher being expected to actually type in the name of the child. It gets rid of any problems that you may have with spelling, etc., etc. Or they may have nicknames or shortened forenames, and you actually want the full details that's on Active Directory. As for the design of the page, fairly straightforward. You can change the layouts, you can change the page design, so you can have nice different colours, you can have a nice shade of pink if you want, or green, and as I said, everything's based on tables, so it's really, really simple. You can split cells, merge cells, really, really simple to use. This is the one I was talking about, which is the current user form, which basically this shows another feature within InfoPath 2010, which is the functions. So you simply add a text box, as shown in this top section, and then in the value, the default value, there's a little function button. If you click on that function button, then basically you have a section which you can add functions in. InfoPath 2010 has a hell of a lot of functions you can add in. Username is just one of them, which then it pulls out the actual username of the current person who's logged on. It has other options, so you can have now is one, which basically puts in the current date. So if you want to have a form which is time stamped to a certain extent, so you know when that form was actually, or that list item was created, they can use the now function, and that will give you actually date and time right down to the literal second that that form was saved, which is great. So that's sort of the basics of InfoPath 2010. What I'm going to do now is move on to SharePoint 2010. When we get to the end, which we're 5 or 10 minutes off, so then you know, we can ask questions and answers, and I'll try and answer anything that you've got. So SharePoint 2010, SharePoint Designer 2010. Nice thing about this product, it's completely free. Download it from Microsoft's website. Connects to your SharePoint site. So basically you open it up using the button here, which basically says open site. Connect to your SharePoint site collection that you want to use, and then you can see all the current workflows. So in this section here shows you any workflows that are already on the site, which there will be, which is the current crop of standard workflows that are on SharePoint 2010. And then you can actually go in and start to create new workflows. So as you can see, there's another section here, which another button, which is the list workflow. If you click on that, then you can basically create a new workflow that's connected to an actual list. So once you've done that, then basically what you do is you input steps. So you can have different steps that go through the SharePoint Designer workflow. You have conditions and actions, and you basically add those in to the actual workflow. So in this section you can see we've added some conditions, and then you have resultant actions. So a condition will be if a certain value equals a value. Well, as you can see, the values are blue, and what you do at that point is you click on those values. You then choose sections from the list and say if this certain field is equal to this. So for instance, in the absence report, if the cover manager approval is equal to yes, then basically you will then go down to this section, which is a resultant action, which says, well, if that is true, then email these particular users. And then with the email form, you can either add users from AD, so you can literally type in an AD address into there to send the email to, or as you can see from this lookup here, you can actually pick out a user from the form. So as it showed on the absence request that the line manager was already listed in the form, it can pull that email address out and say, well, if it's been approved by the cover manager, then we can send it to the line manager using this email address. So it uses the small bit of code to actually pull that out. The subject as well, again, you can see just here that we've got function buttons, so we can actually put functions in there. So we can actually put in there as the title, as the subject of the actual email. We can pull in things from the actual list, so we can actually add in absence request from, and then put a little function in, which is the username field that was in the SharePoint form. And then the body of the text, again, you can type whatever you like and format it, but the add and change lookup button, which you've got in the bottom left hand corner, we can basically use that to pull out information from the actual form. So it will pull out, and it'll pull out the dates, the times, anything that's in that form that's been added to that list can be added to that email, so that so what we use it for is so the cover manager gets that email. They don't have to actually look at the form to get the information. It's all there in the email for them to read through, check the diary, can that teacher have that time off, and then she can go back into the form and approve it or not, as the case may be. So what I thought I would do is just show you this, which is actually the absence request form. It's the actual SharePoint workflow, And as you can see, you can either have a simple one, which is just a straightforward single line that if something equals something, then send a email, or quite complex, which as you can probably see, this is a mixture of the two. So in the top section, we are basically looking if the cover manager approval has been declined, then send an email to the staff member telling them if it's been approved, then send it basically send it to the line manager, and then so on and so on. So then we've got different approvals and financial approvals and so on and so on. And everything is based on how it changes. So you can in SharePoint Designer 2010 tell the workflow whether it's going to start when a new item is added or start when an item is changed. In this case, this is when one is changed, so it actually goes through, and if something's approved, looks at the next step and carries out the rest of the workflow. You can also then obviously log steps. So as you can see here, it's got to this point of the workflow, and it then logs into the task items of SharePoint what point the workflow has got to. So if there's any problem, you can actually go back and see how far the workflow got to before any problems hit. So that's SharePoint Designer 2010. The one thing I was not on there, and what I wanted to add in as well, was Visio 2010. I don't know whether anybody has actually heard of Visio. Hopefully you have. But you can actually produce SharePoint workflows with Visio as well. You can either export from SharePoint Designer to Visio to give you a graphical representation of the workflow you've created, or you can create a workflow and like a flow chart within Visio and then export that to SharePoint Designer to add in the bits for the people it emails. Visio will not allow you to put in who is going to be emailed or what is going to happen to a certain person or part of the form. Basically, all Visio will do will let you create the actual graphical flowchart. So if you've got an extremely complex workflow, it might be a nice idea to actually start it in Visio, so you can actually see a graphical view, actually get your head around what you're trying to do with the workflow before you put it back into SharePoint Designer to actually tie it down to, well, email this person, log this to the actual task list of SharePoint. So that's what Visio can do for you. Excuse me. Okay, so that's basically a quick tour. What I've got here is my contact details. So there's my email, my Twitter account, and my blog. What I would say now is if anybody has got any questions on that they have or opinions, then please use the Q&A at the top of your live meeting client, and I will try and answer as many as I can. What I'll probably do is try and, if you do have a question, is probably, if it's relevant, read it out and give the answer at the same time so everybody can hear the question and answer. But in the meantime, if you have or haven't got questions, then thank you for listening to the live meeting. The recording will be on the blog at some point, possibly tonight or tomorrow. And thank you for attending.